The story began with the fact that in my cellar a shelving shelf broke. After stretching the cat by the tail all day, I went there only in the evening. By the way, we have a common cellar. In the courtyard between the houses there is a hill with 2 entrances from opposite sides. Inside the tunnel with separate side sections, lockable. In general, having taken tools, a player and a helmet. It was necessary to work under the ceiling, and there was an experience of applying the head. I set off in the November twilight on a labor feat. When I arrived, I got an unpleasant surprise. Some of the lights illuminating the main corridor were off, including the part where the door to my section was located. Okay, the lock can be opened by touch, and in the cell itself there is a separately output light, opening the door, which blocked about 2/3 of the corridor. I laid out the tool on the shelf and went out to close the door so as not to interfere with those who would go during my work. Accidentally looking in the direction of the exit, I saw a silhouette approaching against the background of light with a package in hand. The looming hood of the tense cloak seemed familiar to me. "Good evening, Mr. Wilson." I greeted a pensioner from a neighboring house, taking out my earpiece. The answer was a hoarse exhalation, or an attempt to spit. "Are you sick?" Uncle Grisha was not a fool to roll, so a slight stagger did not bother me. Instead of answering, the packet, describing an arc, flew sharply into my head. I instinctively ducked a little, jumped back into my section, and slammed the door shut with a hammer and the doorknob. My face hurt. Apparently there was a jar in the package that burst from the impact, cutting my skin and pouring pickle from some homemade preparations. From behind the door came an already undisguised short growl, and then a jerk of the door. Against the background of my pounding heart, the last few seconds replayed in my head. The silhouette for a pensioner hit too sharply, and the brush that flashed in the light from my lamp was clearly not his. Pale, weary, and, as it seemed to me, stained with something dark. There were a couple more jerks at the door, and then some rustling. Something flickered in the hood near the door, then the same pale hand appeared in it, rummaging along the jamb, without hair, strong, with short coarse nails and stained with earth or some other dirt. The rolled-up sleeve of a jacket or cloak exposed an equally pale elbow with scratched skin, although their vent was only the size of 1 brick, just in case. I hit my fingers with the board I had brought. The limb immediately disappeared to an irritated hiss from behind the door. Moving away from the initial excitement, I thought. There was no phone with him, and he would not take it from under the ground. At home, they were waiting for me in a little over an hour. About the same amount of time was left before the attendant came to lock the entrances to the cellar. There was little point in screaming. I tried, but I could be heard through the door, except perhaps by the person standing at the very entrance. And then, if it is quiet on the street, and behind the door is some kind of aggressive, not a drug addict, not just a psycho. I then attributed the dirt on my hands to the fact that he opened someone's cellar cell, where he stole snacks to the table. Some doors were made of thin plywood and with a symbolic lock. And then he met me and he was wedged, and I missed it because of the darkness and plugged ears. I was snapped out of my thoughts by a sound I didn't expect. There was a soft, polite knock on the door 1 time, 2, 3. I reflexively took a step towards her and stopped. Then the door was hit hard enough to throw dust. A few blows turned into jerks. Apparently, not hoping to knock out the door, made of steel sheet. He tried to make my bolt slide out, but the hammer got stuck in the handle and was not going to fall out. Sending him away, I leaned against the rack and thought again. Although he would not open the door, he did not want to spend the night in the cellar in fairly light clothes. But it didn't feel like going out. I could fight back either with a hammer or with a piece of board, and I never really had to fight. The attempt to smoke failed. The damp air of the cellar made it impossible to stimulate thought in the usual way. However, patting my pockets, I found, in addition to the lighter, also a flashlight. Deciding, for lack of a better way, to at least look who was causing me problems, I put the stepladder stored in the cellar against the wall and shone it to the outside of the door through the ventilation. He stood with his back against the opposite door. The flashlight illuminated heavy boots, dark trousers, and a long hooded jacket. And then I turned the light on the face, lifting his thin, almost invisible lips. The disturber of my peace of mind bared large fangs that dotted his mouth. Then he jumped from his place, catching on the jamb of my door. I suddenly collapsed to the floor along with the stairs. Yellow eyes with vertical pupils flashed in the ventilation opening. Then the face disappeared and there was silence. I was glad that I had thought to use a flashlight. If before that, somewhere in the back of my mind, the thought was stirring to open the door and still break this freak in. Now it has given way to the desire to barricade the door with everything that is possible. The situation was depressing. Soon the cellar will be locked up for the night and I will have to spend the night with no one knows what under the door. And I could only hope that there were no pry bars or fittings in the adjacent sections to pry the door and remove it from its hinges. After sitting idle for a while, I started when I heard a metallic clang. The attendant locked the entrance farthest from me from the outside. There was a rustle outside the door and fast-moving footsteps. I was already glad that the freak was frightened off as the light went out. Then, near the nearest entrance there was a switch that turned off the light in the entire cellar, which was turned off before closing. If the attendant does not see the light in the corridor, she will decide that there is no one in the cellars and will prohibit him without even checking. Therefore, when I heard the creaking of the door hinges at the entrance, I yelled the first thing that came to mind into the ventilation. "Help! There's a drug addict with a knife. Call the police." The door was slammed shut, and I heard the thud of a padlock. Hurried footsteps were heard again in the corridor, this time in my direction. Heavy blows rained down on the door, as if they had been beaten with the shoulder or kicked. Suddenly, the light flashed. From the side of the corridor there was swearing and blows on the door. This freak also propped up the front door. There was a thump behind the wall. A minute later there was a knock on the door, loudly demanding to open it. "Why are you locked up? Got stoned or something?" The sheriff questioned me, standing in the corridor of the cellar. I denied it, assuring me that I never drank anything stronger than tea and was not a fan at all. "Okay, to hell with you. Let's go outside and talk." We were walking in single file to the exit when I heard a not too characteristic sound for a cellar from behind a half-open door in one of the cells, just one of those that were not locked. Strongly invited basses sounded. Offering to check, I opened the door and shone a lantern. The cellar was almost empty. On the old shelves only some fragments of boards and a few moldy cans. Several bricks were knocked out in the wall opposite the entrance. Behind the gap began a tunnel wide enough for a not too large adult to crawl through. The sheriff grunted something indefinite, saying that tomorrow morning he will check with the group. But going out into the street, we heard the same pumping beat, but louder and clearer, from the first floor of a nearby house. A slightly drunk guy who came out to knock on the threshold tried to assure that their noise was within the prescribed limits and, in general, the time was still childish, far from night. After smoking on the porch, the sheriff and I agreed that tomorrow I would go to him to find out about the hole. Although the tunnel seemed strange to him, he did not much believe in a violent drug addict climbing holes in the cellars. About the strange physiognomy, I kept silent. I understood that if he believes in a drug addict, then only in my face. However, the next meeting showed that in his eyes I was at least partially rehabilitated. As he told me, he came in the morning to check another suspicious place. Under the apartment where the party was going on, there was a bought-out basement, which a couple of years ago they wanted to finish either for an office or for something else. Documents were drawn up, building materials were delivered, and then the owner was not up to it. As a result, the room stood locked and seemed to be of no use to anyone. The owner lived nearby and without any problems agreed to let the sheriff in for an inspection. But inside there were strange things. The inward opening door was supported from the inside by a roll of linoleum. In the basement itself, they found windows covered with newspapers and sacks, a knocked-together couch, sockets from the basement lighting, and old clothes. Paths were trodden in the dust, including a door with an open lock leading to the common part of the basement. This was the police verdict. The bum arbitrarily populated a long, empty room, dug a hole in the cellars for thefts, and, having stumbled upon me out of fright, tried to knock me, after which he hastily fled. They did not start the case, since all the damage was broken light bulbs in the corridor. I did not comment aloud on my opinion about the homeless with the manners of moles and tried to forget these events, although I got rid of the habit of walking in the evening with headphones. But the other day, returning home in the company of friends, I noticed a man crouching near the garbage cans. Familiar yellow eyes gleamed between a low-slung hat and a scarf wound under her nose.